how do we procure the hardware necessary for our armed services, given the challenges, the fact that we don't have the fact that we have a declining industrial base, that I think public policy, high taxes, invasive regulatory policies, and artificially low prices abroad have pushed American manufacturing, much of it overseas. Shipbuilding, case in point, there is no commercial shipbuilding industry. It's all Department of Defense. And so we have 6 shipyards right now, and so we're debating, since the United States government is the only customer, can we afford to have six shipyards and keep them all busy to where it's at all cost effective? And so we're dealing with these challenges on a daily basis. On one day, early last year, I was reading a very short article in a magazine somewhere, and it was only 6 column inches. And it talked about China, and that it seemed that China had, on these rare earth elements, that China has, had the vast majority of them, and that they were used, that some of these rare earth elements, these rare earth metals, were used certainly in the manufacturing of weapon systems. And so that caught my attention as a member of the Armed Services Committee. So I tore it out of the magazine, took it over to my staff, and said, we really ought to look at this. And it was kind of like peeling back an onion. And so it really did concern me as an issue. In fact, we were able to get an amendment on the Defense Authorization Bill last year that, in fact, required the GAO to do an analysis as to the supply chain issues involving rare earths and the problems that would be related in terms of defense procurement, given the fact of our reliance on China. So why am I concerned in terms of our reliance on China? Well, I think that also goes back. In fact, my mother was born and raised in the French concession in Shanghai, China, before World War II, grew up there. My father met my mother there, serving the United States Army after World War II, went over there to disarm the Japanese, and then stayed on as an advisor, as part of an advisor group to Chiang Kai-shek in the nationalist Chinese army. And so I guess I grew up with an anti-communist bias. But I'll say this, I think that America's reliance upon a country that is ill-defined in terms of our relationship with them. And we have a lot of discussions in the Congress. Is China, certainly we agree it's a rising military power. Is it potentially a peer competitor to the United States? The fact that they clearly don't share our strategic interests. If we look at some policies that they've been engaged in terms of their foreign policy, in the Sudan, in terms of exploiting the oil resources there and assisting the government of Sudan that is engaged in genocide in Darfur, contrary to U.S. policy, where they've done oil deals in Iran that frustrate what we're trying to do there in terms of isolating Iran diplomatically. But I think that it was best said, I think in terms of defining our relationship with China and a concern about being reliant upon them for what is truly a strategic resource, was recently in February when the President of the United States had decided to meet with the Dalai Lama, the spiritual leader of Tibet. And he was warned by the Chinese government about that meeting. And in fact, China issued a statement the day before the President had decided to undergo the meeting, and said, quote, if the U.S. leader chooses this period to meet the Dalai Lama, that would damage trust and cooperation between our two countries, and how would that help the United States surmount their current economic crisis? And so the fact that China is pretty much the largest sovereign debt holder of U.S. Treasuries, that they have that kind of leverage over the United States, and it's only going to increase over time if we let it. And I think that this rare earth issue is a component part of that, and is a real concern. I think that we have written legislation out of my office that was introduced, I believe, yesterday, was dropped yesterday, and it is entitled the Rare Earth Supply Chain Technology and Resource Transformation Act, or RESTART Act. And what this legislation will do is that, first of all, it will require a working group to be formed between a variety of federal agencies, from the Department of Defense to Commerce, to look at the issue of rare earths, look at the whole supply chain. Number one, to look at the access to domestic rare earths, the domestic rare earth supply chain, and determine what shortages exist, to create a national stockpile within the Department of Defense of critical rare earths, to evaluate international trade practices and take appropriate action with the WTO when necessary, to provide government-backed loan guarantees for the rare earth supply chain development, to initiate Warranted Defense Production Act projects and programs relative to our national defense and homeland security, to support innovation, training, and workforce development of the entire domestic rare earth supply chain. So that is, in a sense, where we are now. I expect, as we go through this process, there will be folks that will differ on, certainly, my view of China. But I hope that there is a realization that at least that we ought to have some domestic capacity within the United States for a competitive supply chain for rare earth elements. And so, this is, to some extent, I think that when I look at this issue, I look at it in the context of, in a sense, when I look at the relationship between the United States and China, it reminds me of Great Britain in 1946, where they had come out of the war fairly weak, they were deeply in debt, and they had to cede their superpower status to us, to the United States. They were involved in countering communist subversion in both Turkey and Greece, and in 1947 we took over that responsibility. And so I think that it now is a critical time for our country, and I think that, to me, this is as much as a moral issue as it is an economic issue. And I think Edmund Burke, who served in the British Parliament in the 18th century, I think said it best when he said, "All that is necessary for triumph of evil, all that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." And I asked your organization to stand with me in support of this legislation so that I can continue this fight on this very critical issue. Thank you so much.